There's the largest seawater desalination plant in the world is in Carlsbad. And we have a number of other groundwater production to help to offset the loss of imported supply. And the basin is itself, this is the Bureau of Reclamation's map. So we'll focus here on the lower basin. And of course, the lower basin has the three states of Arizona, Nevada, and California. And we all come to the table with different interests and try to understand how we're all working together, but we all have a different point of view when we come to the table. Part of it is to understand the relative apportionment. So California has the largest apportionment of 4.4 million acre foot. That's like a backyard swimming pool relative to that size. State of Arizona maybe is like a pop-up pool. It's 2.8 million acre feet, much smaller in size than California, but still a good sized chunk from the river. And poor little Nevada doesn't have a very big allocation, 300,000 acre feet. But nonetheless, they're a big player in the river. So to understand how the river got to where it is today and how the agencies got to where it is, you need to go back to 1900 when farmers came to the Imperial Valley and there was a great place to grow crops. They had great climate for growing crops. It was warm all year round or blazing hot all year in the summer. An abundant supply of water from the Colorado River, and it almost never rains. It only rains about 2 inches of rain a year, and they don't like rain because it messes up their cropping. So it was a great place to farm, but there was one problem, and that was the Colorado River was untamed. And in 1906, the Colorado River broke out of its irrigation channel and flowed uncontrollably into the formerly dry Salton Sink. And as it flowed uncontrollably for a year and a half, it created a channel incision for these rivers that were moving up the valley, as Mark Reisner said, a reverse waterfall flowing up through the Imperial Valley as the Colorado cut this major channel and did major damage in the Imperial Valley. So it was, of course, that's how the Salton Sea was formed, and it's been survived by drainage from the Imperial Irrigation District ever since. But in order for IID to have a reliable place to irrigate, and at the same time Southern California was looking at tapping into the Colorado River Aqueduct, we needed to control the mighty Colorado River. And the place that was chosen was Black Canyon Dam near present-day Las Vegas. And that was the ideal site for a dam. But in order to get a dam approved, we need the support of the other states of the Colorado Basin. And the upper basin was concerned that under the doctrine of prior apportionment, first in time, first in right, that California would grow much faster than the other states and take the lion's share of the river. So before they would agree to a dam, they needed to make sure that they had the ability to grow into the future that wasn't based on priority, the time of priority. And so in 1922, the compact was negotiated where the upper basin got 7.5 million acre feet, lower basin 7.5 million acre feet, plus an extra million acre feet, which is very important. That extra million acre feet was intended for the tributaries, mostly in the state of Arizona. And later, through a treaty with Mexico in 1944, they got 1.5 million acre feet. So with that, Congress approved the Boulder Canyon Project Act, and the building of Hoover Dam began, and it was completed in the 1930s. Hopefully it will never look like this again, but we seem to be headed in that direction. And in 1983, the mighty reservoir filled and spilled, perhaps a once-in-a-lifetime event that caused some major problems downriver, but everyone would seem to like a view like this today. Now, one of the bumps in the road along the way was a dispute between Arizona and California. And there were a number of issues in that dispute, but one of the key issues had to do with that extra million acre foot of the compact that dealt with the tributary use in the state of Arizona. Now, the Gila River historically flowed into the Colorado River, and the average flow is about 2.1 million acre feet. None of that reaches the river today except during flood control times. So Arizona has access to all of that 2.1 million acre feet. So California argued at the time in the 1960s that, well, this is the time when Arizona wanted to build the Central Arizona Project. We argued that there's not any more allocation within Arizona to build it. They get 2.8 million acre feet off the river, and they were already using over 1 million acre feet in the Yuma area and other Indian reservations, and they're using 2.1 from the Gila River. There's just only a little bit more, not enough to build the CAP. That issue went to the Supreme Court, which ruled in favor of Arizona. Arizona won, and they said, no, the tributaries don't count. So Arizona gets the full 2.8 from the river plus whatever tributary water there is. So technically, that's about 2.8 on average plus, or 2.8 plus about 2.1 on average. Technically, Arizona is the largest user of Colorado River, even more than Colorado River water, even more than the state of California, if you include the tributaries. But California still had one ace up its sleeve in the 1960s, and that was that CAP, unlike California, where we funded within the state of California our aqueducts locally, and the Metropolitan Water District built our aqueduct completely with local funds in our service area, CAP wanted the federal government to come in and build the Central Arizona project with subsidized funds, because they didn't have the revenue to do it themselves. And so that required congressional approval. So California was able to put in a rider in the approval that said, okay, well, you can go ahead and build the CAP, but if and when there's ever shortage on the Colorado River, the CAP is junior in priority to all of the state of California. And so CAP reluctantly agreed to that term, and the Central Arizona project was built and started delivering water in the 1990s and was fully built out in the 2000s. But they knew at the time, however, that there wasn't enough water in the system to sustain the extra demand that the CAP put on the system. And Lake Mead, we've seen since the year 2000, has been dropping. We're very close to that first ever shortage. The lower basin has been working cooperatively to try to keep out of shortage, but we know eventually it's going to come. And CAP and the state of Arizona are the ones that are most concerned with this. So when you look at the lower basin, Arizona takes the lion's share of any shortage. Nevada takes a little bit, a small percentage, but they can handle it. And of course, California doesn't take any of that first level shortage. So CAP has a very different position and Arizona in any negotiations of drought plans and anything else, because they're very concerned more than any other state with the level of Lake Mead. Nevada had a different perspective. Nevada at the time, 10 years ago when we were negotiating the agreements, was very concerned because their intake only went down to elevation 1050. And they said, well, maybe Nevada's shortages are small, but if Lake Mead drops below 1050, we can't get any water and we get zero water from Lake Mead. So Nevada had always been 10 years ago on the forefront of the discussions about let's keep Lake Mead up because we can't let Las Vegas go dry. Finally, they decided we're going to invest in our own intake to go all the way down to Dead Pool. It's going to cost us a lot of money and the Las Vegans a lot of money, but we're going to make sure that no one can ever say we're out of water because Lake Mead's getting too low. In fact, we can get water lower into Dead Pool when Arizona and California might not be getting any. So they have a markedly different role in negotiations today. And finally, within California, while California doesn't take shortages, we had to undergo our own transition, major transition, about 10 or 15 years ago. And that was because prior to the year 2000, California was able to take extra water that Nevada and Arizona weren't using, about 700,000 to 800,000 acre-feet a year for 2 generations. From the 1950s to the day I started at MWD in 2002, we were able to get an extra 700,000 to 800,000 acre-feet every year. And so we, in 2003, had to cut back and live with less water. And there was no sympathy from the other states. They said, well, you knew it was coming, you had to do that. We said, yeah, but 2 generations of water, takes some serious adjustments within California. And unfortunately for Metropolitan, the good news is we're in the highest priority state, and this is our partners, by the way. This is Imperial Irrigation District that uses more water than any other state, Coachella Valley Water District, Palo Verde Irrigation District, and of course, MWD. And unfortunately for MWD, we're the lowest priority in California. So the good news is we're in a high priority state. The bad news is we're the junior priority. And so when California was cut back, Metropolitan, which had been diverting about 1.25 million acre-feet of Colorado River water every year, was cut back to 550. So we know what it's like to lose a lot of water. That 700,000 acre feet we lost permanently is bigger than the shortage declaration that Arizona will take when we hit that shortage trigger. So how did we do? How did we adopt? We could not survive with only 550 and survive and supply 19 million people. So what we needed to do, instead of taking this extra water that wasn't being used or surplus water, we had to reduce the agricultural demand of the parties ahead of us. To do that, though, first we need an agreement to divide up that 3.5 million acre feet, that 88% of the high priority ag water, into smaller groups. And in 2003, the Quantification Settlement Agreement was approved, which capped IID at 3.1 million acre feet, Coachella at 330, so that now we could do transfers from the ag area to their urban area to help offset the loss of water that we felt in 2003. We implemented agricultural programs with Imperial Irrigation District. The concept here was grow the same amount of crops with less water by lining canals, by putting in sprinkler, by putting in pump back system. Because the water didn't flow to the Colorado River, there was no return flow credit, so you could, by putting in canals, you would actually reduce the demand of Colorado River water. You can't do that in western Colorado because you line a canal. It just means there's less water going to the river. There's not really savings. But in IID, there is savings, and we've done that, invested hundreds of millions of dollars for IID to reduce their demand to grow the same crops with less water. We also lined the All-American and Coachella canals that lost about 100,000 acre feet of water a year in the deserts. And finally, we also did a program with Palo Verde Irrigation District to incentivize them to not grow crops on a rotational basis, a rotational fallowing program. I've read a lot of stories about this agreement that the city slickers came into the Palo Verde Valley and stole the water rights from the farmers and left them holding the bag. I was in the negotiations. That's not how it went down. We were outgunned and outsmarted by those farmers. They knew exactly what they wanted. They cut the deal that they wanted to protect themselves and the valley. And it turned out to be a good program. What they wanted really was an upfront payment. It's a 35-year agreement, but it has a big upfront payment. We paid them $3,200 an acre just to be in the program, to then pay them an additional $800 an acre to fallow every year. And $3,200 an acre was about the value of the land at the time in 2003. So with that, it was a voluntary program. We had about 90% of the farmers participating. And we can then have a variable call between, in a wet year, we lower the call to about 10% of the valley. And then the dry year, the recent drought we went through, we fallow about a third of the valley. And land has to be rotational fallow. It can only be fallowed for 5 years, and it has to go back into production to grow crops. The other thing that was important to us in Southern California was the ability to bring in water in dry years and less in wet years. So we didn't need to just do transfers alone because we needed some variability in our supplies. And so in 2007, the Lake Mead intentionally created surplus program was approved that allowed agencies, Metropolitan, to store water in Lake Mead in wet years and recover it in dry years. And we had a big drought in 2015, 2016, and going into that drought, we had 580,000 acre feet of water stored in Lake Mead to get ready for that. That's about 8 feet of water in Lake Mead had Metropolitan's name on it. We took most of that out in this drought, and last year was wet. We put a lot of it back in, and this year we're putting more back in because it has two purposes by putting water in Lake Mead. One is it helps us in a dry year get more out, but two, it props up the level of Lake Mead and avoids a shortage and helps the system as a whole. And so if we don't need the water, that's a good place to keep it. So when we enter our negotiations, and every few years we seem to be entering new negotiations, all of the parties are at the table. You have the Arizona interests, the CAP, and the state. The state of Arizona is very important because, unlike California and Nevada, the state of Arizona holds the water rights and contracts for Colorado River water. So the state of Arizona is very important in the negotiations. And CAP is also important because they're the ones on the hook for a cutback. And it's like, ooh, okay, that's a little bit better. You have the state of Nevada, Southern Nevada Water Authority, which has different goals. And then, of course, in California, the state actually has a low
Hey, this isn't personal, Bill, really.
Lower roll. My time is up, I think. Good, because this is my last slide. State of Arizona, the state of California doesn't have a big role. They're mostly symbolic. It's the agencies that have contracts that really do the negotiating. And whether it's Metropolitan, IID, Coachella, PVID, we all have different interests because the ag interests are the high priorities within California. They're more protected than we are. So we all have a common goal of protecting our Colorado River supplies, but the give and take we do within each state and within our collective states is quite a dance that we're trying to figure it all out. And this year, we're trying to get a drought contingency plan done and approved this year. The dance continues and gets more and more complex. So thanks for your time this morning.
So next up, Amy Haas is going to talk to us about some of the Upper Basin entities and interests.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here today and see familiar faces and not so familiar faces. I am going to start by talking a little bit about the Upper Colorado River Commission, specifically its authorities, the governance of the commission, and the staff. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the stakeholder involvement. Brent touched on this in his intro, as well as kind of the alphabet soup of state agencies who are involved in our Colorado River, kind of our day-to-day work on the river. So what is the UCRC? It was formed by compact, and actually I've got a whopping 5 slides that I'm going to project here, and I think I'll start. Can I just tee this up, Brent, with my... And Bill and I share this slide, so this is great. This is, we joke on the river about this slide as being one of the more referred to aspects of the 2012 basin study. It is, I think it's just a centerpiece of so many presentations on the Colorado River, but I think this will provide some context if you can kind of hone in, especially on the upper basin portion of the map up there. So again, the Upper Colorado River Commission was formed by compact in 1948 as an interstate administrative agency. It is governed by a commission, and it is staffed by administrative, legal, and technical personnel. Among its authorities, the UCRC makes estimates to forecast water runoff on the Colorado River and its tributaries, collects data on stream flows, storage, and diversion and use of the waters of the Colorado River. And it also has the authority to make findings, including the following findings. As to water supply used in the upper basin each year, the quantity of water deliveries at Lee Ferry each water year, and findings on the necessity and the extent of curtailment of uses under the 48 Compact. And I have heard the UCRC likened to the Upper Basin Water Master, which would be the corollary to the role of the Secretary in the Lower Basin. Just given the extent of our authorities under the 48 Compact. So who is on our commission? We have got one commissioner from 4 of the upper division states that is designated or appointed in accordance with the laws of his respective state. And I'd like to note this is common knowledge for the Colorado River folk here, but we often make a distinction between the upper basin and the upper division states. And in this case, this is a distinction with a difference. Arizona is in the upper basin and obviously in the lower basin, and is also signatory to the 48 Compact. So it gets 50,000 acre feet of depletion under the 48 Compact. However, it does not have a seat on the commission, and it's not an upper division Division State. So we've got 4 commissioners, Upper Division State commissioners, and then we've got 1 federal commissioner if the President of the United States so designates a commissioner. And any commission action requires a vote of 4. I'm going to show you a photo now. So this is this is a photo of our 4 Upper Division commissioners. We also have a federal commissioner, and I'm just going to go through these. You recognize James Eklund, Colorado's commissioner on the left. Pat Terrell, second from left, and he is Wyoming's commissioner. Eric Millis, second from right. He's Utah's commissioner. And Tom Blaine, who is on the right, and he is New Mexico's commissioner. And then we've got Felicity Hannay, who is the federal commissioner and stands alone. I exhumed my photo files for a photo of all 5 commissioners, and of course could not find one in time for the presentation today. So Felicity will have to stand on her own. So let me talk a little bit about each one of these gentlemen, and they're not always all men. I have to make a comment that, full disclosure, I was New Mexico's commissioner for a period of almost 2 years, sitting on the commission. Currently, Wyoming's commissioner, Pat Terrell, who was actually the longest standing commissioner on the commission, was appointed in 2003, is the state engineer of Wyoming. Utah's commissioner is the director of the Division of of Water Resources for the state. And James Eklund, as many or all of you know, is currently in a private law practice, but was formerly the director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board. And then New Mexico's commissioner is the state engineer of New Mexico, and this is Tom Blaine. Felicity Hannay, who is the federal commissioner, has retired from the practice of water law, but she had prior to joining the commission, she had a very long career as a Colorado water attorney. So in the case of Colorado, New Mexico, and Wyoming, each commissioner has been appointed by his respective governor and serves at the pleasure of each governor. And in Utah, however, Utah's a little bit of an outlier. Utah's state statute specifies that the Utah Water Resources Board and the governor must jointly appoint a representative to represent the state on all compact commissions for the state of Utah. The other kind of important governance aspect with respect to the UCRC is that alternates are appointed at the pleasure of each commissioner. Typically, we have 2 alternates per commissioner, but sometimes there's more than 2. Wyoming has 3 alternates currently, and we actually have one of Colorado's alternates here with us today, John Stolt. So I'm going to fast forward now and talk a little bit about the staffing of the commission. This is this is a photo of a full complement of staff. This is before Don Osler, who is in the center, retired as executive director, and I assumed that position. We are at an all-time low, I think, with respect to UCRC staffing. In years past, we had more of a staff level kind of technical team, engineers and technical support, but we are down to a very tiny staff. I do want to make a point, however, but that this small staff, so I'm on the left, Terry Gom is our administrative assistant on the far right. The small staff really belies the fact that we have a much larger professional network. We interact with the technical and legal teams of the Upper Division states almost daily. I think I'm on the phone with lawyers and engineers from each of the 4 on a daily basis. So while we operate kind of on a shoestring with respect to the UCRC staff proper, we have the resources and relationships with the 4 Upper Division state technical and legal people, which is a phenomenal resource for us. And then we also, especially in recent years, have had the benefit of in-kind support from the Bureau of Reclamation. The UC region has provided, many of you are familiar with the System Conservation Pilot Program. We have had a reclamation engineer detailed to the commission over the last 4 years of that program, providing some in-kind support. So again, I think it's deceptive to see the three positions up there because we are interacting with a much larger web. The commission, by compact, has 3 standing committees. There's a budget committee, a legal, and an engineering committee. Each state commissioner appoints committee members from his or her state. For the state of Colorado, the engineering committee includes representation from the River District, the Division of Water Resources, the Southwestern Water Conservation District, the CWCB, and the legal committee includes the Colorado Assistant Attorney General's, Lane Leoniak was pointed out earlier, private practitioners representing various interests, Northern Water, Southwestern, Southeastern Conservancy District, CWCB, and Denver Water, as well as the River District. So again, this big web that I've referred to is also in play with respect to our committees. And finally, I mentioned earlier this alphabet soup of agencies at the state level. I mean, we often hear about various agencies in the states that touch on water but don't really appreciate, especially if it's outside of our state, what in fact the function of those agencies is. And I'd like to kind of use as an example the CWCB and the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission, because I think they are two corollaries. They present two corollaries. They're agencies that are very closely aligned in terms of missions and very involved in interstate water issues. So the CWCB mission statement in part is to conserve, develop, protect, and manage Colorado's water for future and present generations. The New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission has statutory authority to protect, conserve, develop waters of the state of New Mexico, interstate and otherwise. So again, very closely aligned missions and mandates. At a practical level, both have the authority over water planning. Both are governed by a board appointed by their respective governors, and both are responsible for policy determinations in matters affecting the states, their respective states, in particular on interstate issues. And we've really seen kind of a presence, a very strong presence with respect to the business of the commission and their involvement in that. I think I'm going to leave it here and kind of defer to any questions you may have about the commission. But before I do, I just want to make a kind of a parting comment regarding the larger governance of the basin. We heard from Bill Hazenkamp that we really endeavor to do things cooperatively, and I think when you get outside of the upper basin, we have a governance structure, if you will, of the 7 basin states. And the basin state business is governed at a principal level. So you'll hear comments made about the governor's representatives of the 7 basin states, or the principals and that sort of thing. So when we're dealing with issues of moment, right, the drought contingency planning I'll use as an example, oftentimes the governance structure that again transcends the upper basin, lower basin division is the 7 basin states principals group. And I wondered about it as I was preparing for this presentation. I thought, what is the genesis? What was the genesis of the 7 basin states and their involvement in the river? And they're certainly not named in the 1922 Colorado River Compact. There's really no reference to them that I could find in any of the compacts. And I called Eric Kuhn to pick his historical brain, as it were. And I think that Eric persuaded me that probably the genesis of the seven basin states can be found in the 1968 Colorado River Basin Project Act. And I would proffer that they've become probably more involved. I think at the beginning of 2000, when we were working on the surplus guidelines and then going into to the negotiation of the 2007 interim guidelines. But they are definitely a force on this river. And again, I think that's probably, I'm going to defer to Eric on the accuracy of that, but I find that to be interesting and also something that I think that folks need to be aware of when we talk about who's at the helm when it comes to the business of the river. Thank you.
Next up, Andy Mueller is going to talk about the role of conservation and conservancy districts on the Colorado River.
Well, thank you, Brent, and good morning to everybody. Appreciate you guys being here. The Colorado River Water Conservation District, quite a long name. You hear it called the Colorado River District, the River District. When we leave the state and we call ourselves the Colorado River District, I think we confuse people down in the lower basin. But the reality is we're a water conservation district that has its own organic statute. And Brent asked me to talk about the conservation district's roles in within the state and within the Colorado River management framework that everybody's talking about, but also to talk about conservancy districts. And I think many people in this room looking around are either associated with a conservation district somewhere in the state or a conservancy district. But I also find there are an awful lot of people, both within the water community and certainly out in the general public, who really fail to make the distinction between what those organizations are. And so I want to first address the conservation district concept and origin and its role today in the Colorado River, and then talk a little bit about the Conservancy District, Water Conservancy District Act, and what those conservancy districts do and the role they play within Colorado and frankly within the larger river politics on the Colorado. So there are 4 water conservation districts in the state of Colorado. The first that was founded in 1937 is the Colorado River Water Conservation District. The second, Bruce Whitehead and Beth are here, Beth Van Vers from the Southwest Water Conservation District, was founded by statutory act in the 1950s. Together, the two of them cover the entire western slope of Colorado and the entire watershed for the Colorado River within our state. We also have, and I don't mean to give them short shrift, but they're not the focus of this panel discussion. There's the Rio Grande Water Conservation District, which was founded in the 1960s, and the Republican Water Conservation District that was founded in the 2000s. All 4 of these districts have a really interesting and unique statutory charge in their organic acts, because every one of those acts is a different act. They have both the internal obligation within their district to assist in the development and protection and conservation of water for the benefit of the inhabitants within the district. So they have this internal district charge. And our district covers an area that is all of 12 and part of 3 additional counties, so 15 counties. The Southwest covers, I believe, an additional 9, although I can't quite keep that straight all the time. So they have that internal obligation, and I think I'm not going to focus in today's discussion on that internal workings, but I know that we and the other conservation districts spend a lot of time focusing on helping develop water resources within our districts. The second part of our charge is unique in that I'm not aware of other political subdivisions of the state of Colorado that are regional that have an interstate charge or a statewide mandate. And in our organic statute, the language is the same as the other three conservation districts within the state. And that is that in addition to these interior or internal charges that I talked about, they are also charged with safeguarding for Colorado all of the waters to which the state of Colorado is equitably entitled under the Colorado River Compact. So ours says the Colorado River Compact, obviously the Rio Grande and the Republican have changed those words out in their own rivers. But the Southwest and our district specifically address the conservation districts as having that charge to protect the entire state's entitlement to the river. And so what that has meant over the years is that we are largely a supporting agency to the CWCB and the Attorney General's office in helping our commissioner at the UCRC level, helping our state's team on interstate issues to provide technical and legal backup. Frankly, we also have a tremendous external affairs team at the River District, and the Southwest is also engaged in those activities, both at a state and federal level, to really help promote the concept of the state making sure that we're getting our full, fair, equitable share in the river. So in our instance, the River District, it covers about 28% of the state of Colorado geographically. It actually only covers, we have a population of about 500,000, just to put that in comparison to the Metropolitan Water District. But we have 25 very hardworking employees that consist of engineers, lawyers, lobbyists, and administration staff that are really, I would say, probably about equally split on dealing with our internal mission and dealing with our external interstate role. And we take that role seriously. We in the current climate where we see diminishing water supply in the Colorado River, we have very actively and participated and led studies trying to figure out for the entire state, not just for our residents, but for the entire state, what the risks are associated with our allocation within and the amount of what our real allocation is within the Colorado River, and what the risks would look like to our state should we exceed that allocation, both as a state and as an upper basin, and what that would then do to the economy of our entire state. Because the Colorado River, and I think everybody here understands that, but I sometimes failing to mention it is confusing, is that it is, at least from our perspective, the river of state interest. It provides water to almost every other river basin in the state for domestic, for municipal, for agricultural production. And without the waters from the Colorado River, or having to forcibly, involuntarily cut back on the use of those waters, would potentially cause great economic harm to all sectors of our state. And so we, at the River District and the Southwest, have led, in conjunction with our 4 basin roundtables, risk studies and trying to understand and get data out for general consumption in the water community so that people can elevate their understanding and we can walk into periods of drought like the one we're experiencing with an informed sense of what we're facing and maybe help figure out options to thrive and continue to thrive as a state economically. So, as I said, we do these risk studies. We are, as mentioned by Amy, our legal and engineering staff are represented both as advisors to the state's commissioner in the Upper Colorado River Commission, James Eklund, as well as we help provide that additional support for Amy and her small team at the UCRC in terms of providing additional funding and technical and legal background. Our district has actually spent quite a bit of money paying for technical work at the UCRC level over the last 8 or 10 years, trying to help the entire Upper Basin understand some of the risks through doing quite a bit of modeling on the big river issues out there. And it's again a strange role as I took over the general manager position from Eric Kuhn, and really digging into our budget. It's fairly amazing to me in terms of the amount of our budget that is spent on these bigger river issues, and I think it directly relates to our organic statute, and it makes us, I think, make sure that we are accomplishing what the organization was set out to do. I think, just quickly turning to water conservancy districts, they are formed under the next title, next act in the Colorado Revised Statutes after the conservation districts, and they are specifically designed to develop and provide water for specified geographic areas. So they're originally, those conservancy districts were created by they're created by a judicial a vote and a judicial action that creates the district and gives them taxing authority to usually for very specific purposes. It can be agricultural, providing water for agricultural users, can include municipal, industrial, and manufacturing, and as well as power, and they're those very specific purposes. Some of the players that we run into on the Colorado River who are conservancy districts include Northern Water Conservancy District. It plays a huge role in that because they depend very much on the flow of the Colorado River to provide water to their water users on the Front Range. Originally, that Conservancy District Northern was primarily an agricultural enterprise, and over the changes that we've seen on the Front Range and the growth, it's turned more towards providing water for the urban and municipal users in the area. They still provide a tremendous amount of water for the ag community in the South Platte as well. But because of their interest in making sure that there is a reliable supply of water, well, and I would just say also Southeastern is another player that we frequently see in the Colorado River, both at the state level and in the interstate level. They do send representatives frequently to both the Upper Colorado River Commission meetings as well as the 7 Basin State meetings. We also have on the west slope we have a plethora of water conservancy districts, many of which were actually formed with either assistance or leadership of the 2 conservation districts. And in fact, we have constituents within our district who refer to the Colorado River District as the mother of all conservancy districts, because that was one of the ways in which we helped our constituents develop individual projects, whether it's the Rio Blanco Water Conservancy District or the Upper Gunnison Water Conservancy District or the Yampa Water Conservancy District. Those projects, or Ute Water Conservancy District, I could go on and on, but the idea is, there are specific needs in specific regions, and those districts were formed to meet those needs, often with the help and assistance of our district, or down in the southwest with the conservation district down there. In large part, though, at the interstate level, we do see a number of the conservancy districts who depend upon the Colorado River for their lifeblood present, and it's they're not charged with protecting the waters of the state for the people of the state. They are, however, charged very seriously with making sure that they have a firm supply of water for their water users and they see that as a very important role that they play. And so you have these different interests that sometimes we like to sue each other. Sometimes we spend a lot of time negotiating with one another. I think as water supplies are tightening within our state and within the basin, I would say that we are spending an incredible amount of time talking with the conservation districts and the conservancy districts within the Colorado River, as well as other large trans-mountain diverters, as to how we can creatively move forward with what certainly looks like less water in the future and growing population. And so how do we do that? Certainly we can always resort to lawyers, that's an option. We do our best, and I think I would say on both sides of the slope, we are doing our best to sit down and really work out solutions that are beneficial to everyone. And I think there's a real recognition in today's world that a strong economy on the Front Range is good for those of us on the West Slope and vice versa. So we really do, I feel like in large part we have our differences. We have, because of the nature of those organizations and our different obligations, we do have some conflict inherent in our existence. But in fact, the year that we were founded in 1937 is the same year that Northern Water was founded. It wasn't an accident. We were founded because people on the West Slope were for some reason offended by the Colorado Big Thompson project and felt that they needed a voice that was capable of speaking. The Northern was founded to run the Colorado Big Thompson project in large part. So we have those competing interests, but we've done a really good job, I feel, in the state and at the bigger river issues in trying to work together. Our state, unlike Arizona, as I think Bill alluded to earlier, unlike Arizona, our state does a very good job of these days of trying to resolve our differences through very professional and upfront, honest negotiations that don't involve a lot of combative press coverage and legal disputes. It doesn't always happen, and I'm not saying that it won't change in the future, but I am saying that I believe everybody who is sitting around the table is doing their best to figure out how everybody can move forward in a productive way. So, here we go.
And finally, we'll ask Ted Kowalski to come up and talk about the emerging role in the Colorado River of non-governmental organizations and nonprofits.
Thanks, Brent. So my name's Ted Kowalski. I work for the Walton Family Foundation, and I'm going to talk about our role and the role of philanthropy, but also more broadly NGOs in the context of the Colorado River Basin. But just by way of background, the Walton Family Foundation is a philanthropic organization. It receives its funding from the Walton family, which established the Walmart stores. And they have this enormous sense of responsibility from their wealth to give back to the world. And we work primarily in three areas, trying to break the cycle of poverty through education, through K-12 education. Also in the home region of Arkansas, giving back, trying to improve quality of life through things like art museums and biking trails and the like. And then finally in the environment space, there's an enormous connection to the environment and primarily through water. And we work in oceans with sustainable fisheries in a host of countries in Indonesia, Chile, Peru, Mexico, and the US, trying to improve sustainable fisheries, but also in freshwater, both in the Mississippi River Basin, where we work on water quality issues, and in the Colorado River Basin, where our focus is more on water quantity. Trying to talk about all of the roles of different NGOs in one talk is certainly a challenge. And in the philanthropic world, we talk about when you know one foundation, you know one foundation. And I think that's even more so in the context of all of the different NGOs working in the space, but I'm going to give it my best shot. So the types of NGOs that are working in this space, and I'll just sort of go through the different types of NGOs and talk about specific ones first, and then I'm going to talk about the type of work that we do in these different NGOs, as well as the various sectors that we touch in this work. So first, with regard to NGOs, there's philanthropic organizations, and the Walton Family Foundation is certainly one of the largest organizations working in the Colorado River Basin. We have, dedicated the last 8 years towards this work. We work very closely with the family to check in on the work that we're doing, and we just recently, confirmed we have 20-year goals, we have 5-year strategies that we're trying to implement to ensure sustainable use of the Colorado River Basin for the benefit of the environment as well as the communities that depend on a healthy Colorado River Basin. But we're not the only philanthropic organization working in this space. Certainly the Bechtel Foundation is out of California. They have a strong connection to working on water issues. They focus primarily on California, but we've worked closely with them on some work in the Salton Sea area. They've worked on the U.S.-Mexico agreements that I may talk about in a minute with Minute 323, which was this international agreement signed about a year ago to manage the Colorado River across country lines in a more holistic way. Similarly, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation works worldwide, but recently has started to just experiment in the context of water, and they've been dedicating $5 to $6 million a year for the last couple of years, just sort of dipping their toe in the water to see if they can help drive some additional impact. And the Hewlett Foundation recently adopted a 5-year strategy, and water is critical to that strategy and moving forward. Similarly, there's some smaller organizations, some of which you may know and work with right here in Colorado. The Gates Family Foundation is a smaller foundation, but they work on water, they work on education here in Colorado. And then I'll mention the Pulliam Foundation, which is out of Arizona and is working on water critically. We also work with other NGOs. Primarily, we're funders. We, grant making is a key way that we can influence policy and drive towards change. But really, it's the traditional NGOs that are a large partner with us, and we work very closely with organizations that many of you in this room know: TNC, Trout Unlimited, Western Resource Advocates, National Audubon Society, and Environmental Defense Fund, to name a few. We also work with smaller NGO organizations, more locally based. Here in Colorado, the Colorado Water Trust is a critical partner in our work. But we also work with on-the-ground folks like Friends of the Verde River or the Escalante River Partners, and within Mexico, Pro Natura and others. We also work with and have close partnerships with a number of universities, and one of the key tools that I'll talk about in a second is research or reporting. And so there are we're really lucky in that there are a whole host of universities and colleges within the Colorado River Basin that have strong water and natural resources programs. And we work pretty closely with the University of Colorado and Colorado State University in different aspects, as well as ones in the lower basin, Arizona State University and University of Arizona. And certainly one of the advantages of being a philanthropic organization is you don't have to pick sides between the Rams or the Buffaloes. You can support them both. And I think we also work with organizations or universities outside the basin that might bring a special knowledge or a special expertise. And so, we work with organizations outside, including Duke and Yale and Stanford. And if they have a specific either professor or specific department that is going to be helpful to the long view of how we want to manage this river, we are able to tap that resource and form a partnership and have that be shared among the basin driving forward. And then finally, the other type of organizations that we work very closely with in partnership relates to communications, and that's, certainly NGOs have their own communications work that they do, but we believe that communications is integral to the solutions facing the problems facing the Colorado River Basin. And so more public attention on the importance of water within this basin is critical. And as you all in this room know, it's challenging. I mean, journalism right now is in a challenging time frame generally, just with the way that journalism is developing or unraveling. Importantly, water is so complicated, and you may get one reporter who is able to report on water as part of, a whole host of other things that they're reporting on in terms of transportation or land or air or other natural resources. And so we can bring resources to help make sure that water is covered and covered in a strong way. And we do that both by supporting individual reporters. We've supported at KUNC the hiring of a specific person, and we don't get to control the editorial content. We just say this person should be focused on water and the importance of water facing Colorado and future basins, the entire basin. But we've also educated reporters and journalists through various tours and bringing them out. We supported this organization called the Institute of Natural Resources Journalism, bringing reporters into the Colorado River Basin, meeting a lot of the folks in this room and others to help them understand the complexities of water and why it's so important to be reported on and why we need to continue to look at this problem and look for solutions as a community. Turning more to the types of work, and I touched on this in the context of each of the types of organizations that we support on the ground work. We believe that if you can connect people to healthy rivers and the importance of healthy rivers, that it's not just the environment or the economy, but rather the two go hand in hand, and we believe that to our core. So we have developed these proof point rivers where we are restoring river areas and targeted areas, restoring the flows, and helping connect people to those rivers. And the best example of that is really in the Verde Valley within Arizona, where we have a whole host of tools that we've been able to do that with TNC and some of the local communities. But TNC has established a water fund whereby businesses within the Verde Valley, the towns within the Verde River Valley are now contributing to that water fund because they see how important that river is to their community. And by sort of developing those proof points, we believe we can sort of spread the value of rivers and healthy rivers throughout the entire Colorado River Basin. I think we also work on policy and advocacy through our various NGO partners. We certainly work with some grassroots organizations. One that I think about here in Colorado is American Whitewater that has a direct connection to whitewater boaters and paddlers, and they have a story to tell that is related to our larger story of trying to protect the Colorado River or the health of the Colorado River. And then I mentioned research and our close relationship with universities as well as communications work, where we support both work within NGOs and outside of that. The other thing that I'll mention, besides our grant giving ability with regard to philanthropy, we have a couple of other tools that I think are unique to the NGO community, and certainly the power to convene. And we've started a process here in Colorado along with our colleagues, the Gates Family Foundation, to invite people to have a conversation about the importance of sustainable funding for implementation of Colorado's water plan. And there were conversations occurring already in the context of the IBCC and the Colorado Water Conservation Board, but we felt the need and saw the real need for, if that is to be successful, it needs to be a broader group than the folks that are within the water community. If you're going to be able to sustainably fund water, the water plan within Colorado, you've got to bring non-traditional partners, agricultural voices, cities, businesses, all to the table to help them understand and realize and become champions for that policy. And so that power to convene and sort of see the long-term needs and develop a conversation, I think, is a really important role other than our grant making. And then also, I think we can serve as both thought partners, and we can speak out and call out sort of something that needs to be called out. And I think about Arizona recently, and we certainly weren't the only ones doing this, but Arizona was in sort of a disastrous place, right? The two major water sort of speakers, CAP and the Department of Arizona, were in a all-out feud, both legislatively, in the press, and politically, and it was doing Arizona no good. And what's worse was they were bringing the entire basin down with them. And so we, along with other partners, were calling them out, saying this is too important to the state of Arizona and too important to the entire southwestern United States. You've got to get on the same page. And I think through a lot of different pressure points, they finally are there, and they've formed the steering committee. Ironically and oddly, they've formed this steering committee, and the Walton Family Foundation sits on it. And if you had told me 10 years ago that I was going to help craft Arizona policy because I was sitting in Brent's role as the state of Colorado's representative, I would have never believed you. But here we sit with them, trying to figure out how they can craft a path forward to supporting the drought contingency plan that we may talk about here in a bit. I think with that, I'll end with a couple of key points, which are, one, I think anywhere where you see success on the river, we and NGOs were there, and in the past, 10 or 15 years. I mean, I look at the improvements on the Salton Sea, where the state of California has now a 10-year plan for how they're going to mitigate the Salton Sea. They have funding to do it, and they have a state order that basically they're bound to live by. And we were there helping sort of push the state of California and the federal government and the Imperial Irrigation District to that solution. I look at Minute 319 and Minute 323, where we have NGOs that we're working with. We have water, we have money, and we're driving that success, both the success that we had with Minute 319, but also in the subsequent minute. And we certainly don't do it alone, but I think we're a critical partner in those conversations. And then the second sort of parting comment, I think, will echo Amy's, which is, at least I believe to my core that we are better off if we are at the table trying to negotiate a solution that will work for everyone around the table. And we think while there may be a place for litigation, and there may be a case for hard regulation, and there may be opportunities or needs for that at some points in time, I think we're going to be better off if we're at the table putting all of our resources behind a solution as opposed to fighting one another about what the right solution is. And maybe I'll end it there. Thank you.
So in the next portion of this workshop, I've got a couple of targeted questions for our panelists. But before we do that, we're on a pretty tight schedule. Doug really wants to have us out of here at about 11:20, 11:25. Based on the four initial sort of comments from our panelists talking about the different entities on the river, what their role is, I think we have enough time for one or two clarifying questions. If anybody in the audience has a question for one of the panel members that these comments they've made so far have generated, or you have something you'd like cleared up, we can go ahead and take those right now. If not, that's cool too, but if anybody had something sort of going. Okay. There'll be more opportunities for questions later in the panel, so write them down. The next portion of this panel, I'm going to ask some targeted questions of the panelists that really get to the question of, why do these groups and why do these entities on the river continually attend these meetings or these negotiation sessions on the river? What is their interest that keeps them engaged on the long-term efforts? And what might they lose by not participating actively? And my first question is for Bill. In your initial presentation, you kind of pointed out that California represents this massive population and this economy within the basin. And it has very many different perspectives that are represented on these uses provided by the Colorado River and the different projects in California. You have representatives from agriculture, municipalities, and these state agencies that all play a large role in managing the Colorado River within California. So how does California as a state strive to balance these varied interests within the state and then present a mostly unified front to these basin-wide negotiations on the river?
So thanks, Brent. I think there are really three take-home points to answer that question. The first is time. So I live in Los Angeles County in the middle of the LA Basin. I work in the middle of the basin. Yes, I bike to work and I drive to work, and it's a challenge. But when I go around to speak to various groups, whether it's Northern California or Colorado, Arizona, I find there's a common theme about me before I even get there. Half the people in the room already don't like me because I'm from Los Angeles, or they don't trust me. The other half say, what did that poor guy do to deserve such a fate as to have to live in Los Angeles? Well, it's actually not that bad living in LA. I like it, but it's tough. There's a natural bias wherever I go. If I wear my Dodger hat, I get booed. If I wear my Lakers jersey, Ted gives me a hard time. And football used to be a safe topic for 20 years, but now we have both the Chargers and the Rams, so it's another point of controversy. So it takes times because we need to in Metropolitan have deals with other agencies, other states, but also within California, and there's a natural bias, a natural distrust to anyone from Los Angeles wherever we go. And in the 1990s, we knew that we needed to deal with the Palo Verde Irrigation District. And this is before my time, and we had an economist that went out there and explained to the farmers in Palo Verde why the fallowing program is such a good deal. You're going to make more money not growing crops, and you can reinvest, and the water can come to Southern California. It's a win-win for everybody. And they ran him out of town and said, don't ever come back here again with your economic theories. Instead, it took time to sit down with them, develop a rapport, develop a relationship, to understand where each other is coming from. And it takes a lot of time to get past that initial distrust to say, hey, maybe I can actually do a deal with you. The second thing it takes is money. So we knew that California had to reduce its use, and Metropolitan's share within California's apportionment is 12%. But we needed to, and ag is 88%. We needed to get Metropolitan up to 25% to meet our long-term water supply needs, and to get ag from 88% down to 75%. So once we developed a relationship and a partnership, we had to come up with a lot of money. Billions of dollars of investment in upgrading infrastructure or just payments to participate in various programs were required, which means that we have to come up and increase our water rates a lot in Southern California. Next year, our raw water rates, and this is wholesale rates, are $755 an acre foot, and our treated water is almost $1,100 an acre foot. That's very high water rates compared to other places in the West, but that's what it takes. When we have 19 million people, you can raise more money, but for a reliable water supply, it takes a lot of money. So we ended up into these long-term agreements with PVID, with IID. But the third thing it took is continued outreach. We had a long-term agreement with IID, and we thought we had a good partnership. And then a couple years ago, they sued us. And we scratched our head, and the reason they sued us is because we bought land in the Palo Verde Irrigation District, not to fallow it, but to see if we could incentivize conservation by switching to a crop that used less water. Could we give farmers a lower rent in exchange for maybe putting in crops that use less water, switching from alfalfa to broccoli or other vegetables? Well, the irrigation district didn't like that we were doing that independently, and so they filed a lawsuit, and it was ugly times there for a while. Since that, they've dropped the lawsuit, and we're trying to work together again. But even though you have a relationship and a partnership, it takes continued outreach, continued openness, and because that distrust factor can raise its head at any time. So we, because we are on the junior priority in California and at risk, we structure those deals first, and then once all that hard work is done, the money, the programs, the agreements, the environmental compliance, then we can go to the states and provide a unified, more or less unified front. But one of the challenges that bumps in the road along the way that's unique to California is the Salton Sea. And while we thought we had a good plan to reduce the use, as I said in my introduction, the drainage from Imperial Irrigation District doesn't flow back to the Colorado River, it flows to the Salton Sea. And if you incentivize conservation within Imperial Irrigation District, less water flows to the Salton Sea shrinks, and the big issue there is dust. Dust. It's already, that area is already violating the Clean Air Act, and any more dust is unacceptable. And this year is a key year because this is the first year that IID is not putting extra water into the sea to keep the level up. So we're seeing the sea drop.
I don't know, Bill.
My time's up again, okay. Yes. But that is an extra challenge that and Ted's part of the solution. So he's not only affecting water policy in Arizona, but he's trying to be part of the solution here in California. So that's another unique thing we have, but we try to solve those internally so we don't have to bring our dirty laundry to the other states.
So the next question is for Ted. Ted, in these ongoing conversations and work on the Colorado River, our different state and federal agencies, and as Andy kind of mentioned, the role of the conservation and conservancy districts, they get together and they negotiate these. And Bill kind of alluded to this. It seems like every 5 years the states are getting together for some new big initiative. You had the 07 guidelines in the aughts. You've had the different minutes with the Treaty of Mexico, and now you have drought contingency planning. So what perspectives, information, and considerations are gained by having the NGOs, the philanthropic organizations at the table on these processes, and what could be left out or lost by lack of participation from these groups?
Thanks. I will note that the lights only tend to go out when Bill's speaking, which may be appropriate. I think there's really three answers to that. I think one is certainly money and resources, right? And we talk about the international agreement between the United States and Mexico, where we're managing the Colorado River in a more comprehensive way and a way that also can benefit the environment. And importantly, that there are different aspects of that agreement, but both with regard to water and with regard to money, NGOs or the philanthropic world are splitting the cost of water and the cost of money at a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 proportion. I might argue that maybe the United States federal government and the Mexican federal government shouldn't be paying the same share as the Walton Family Foundation and other, partners, but maybe that is a little bit off, but it is critical to the future of the Colorado River Basin, and we are looking at this in terms of a long-term partnership, and we can bring water and we can bring money to the table and help solve these problems in a way that can benefit the environment as well as the communities that depend on a healthy Colorado River. I think in addition, we can provide either political support or opposition to any particular set of solutions that are being looked at, and it's, you know, I focused primarily on the environmental NGOs, but we work also with agricultural interests, we work with business voices, we work with tribes, because we're all part of the Colorado River Basin, and we all have a piece to play. And to the extent that we can provide capacity to help support those voices being elevated, to make sure that they're heard and that they are not left behind, I think that's important to us, and I think it's important to the community to develop the best solutions. Similarly, and while this isn't necessarily political support per se, but you know, through, and I think about the System Conservation Pilot Program in particular, but through our relationships with entities and NGOs on the ground, I think that System Conservation Pilot Program was remarkably successful in part due to Trout Unlimited and TNC out living in those communities, talking to farmers and ranchers about this program, about how it was a voluntary program, it's a temporary program, and what farmers and ranchers could gain by that program, and you know, helping dispel myths or rumors about that program. And I would argue that the reason why that 2-year pilot program had a 3rd year and then a 4th year was in part due to NGOs sort of out there working with the community, helping them understand what was truth and what was you know, fiction related to that program. Finally, I'd say the thing that is left behind is really this long-term perspective. All right, we're going to hear a lot over the next couple of days from folks who are running for governor or attorney general or different offices, but you know, we have a 20-year goals. We're in this for the long haul, and I think that we can you know, sort of see out beyond the next political cycle and say, well, here's where we need to go for the long-term health or benefit of the basin or of the Colorado River community. And you know, I believe that if we just let things go on as they might go under status quo, you will have winners and you will have losers. And I think that the environment and the agriculture community have the most to gain by participating in these types of conversations, and they have the most to lose. Because I think if we hit a crisis, there will be winners and losers. And I think the solution lies not in any one falling on, you know, with the solution lies not with the problems or the burdens falling on any one state or any one basin or any one country or any one sector, but rather the best solutions lie in sort of working together as a community across sectors, across states, across basins, and across the 2 countries to try to come to you know, more comprehensive, better water management going forward.
Thank you, Ted. So I'm going to harass Andy next. Under the direction of the River District Board and our recently retired friend, Eric Kuhn, the River District has always taken this very active role in providing information, technical background, and these educational efforts regarding basin-wide Colorado River issues. And you've got a lot of your constituents probably within this room. What do residents within the district gain from this priority focus of the board and staff? And do you see a recognizable interest and engagement in these stakeholders because of this focus?
Yeah, thanks, Brent. I would say that our water users and our communities that we represent within our district have a lot to gain and actually benefit tremendously from our interstate work. And really what we're, the reason, in addition to our statutory charge, we're involved in that is that our job, similar to kind of what the NGOs and TED are doing, is our job is to look out 20 or 30 years in the future and identify risks to that a shortage of water or water supply may pose to our communities. And our job is to do our best to see that coming and to be at the table to devise policy and implement programs that are in the best interest of our water users and our communities. And you know, Ted mentions that if we allow a crisis to occur, you know, continue to do business as usual on the Colorado River, we run a risk of entering into a time where there is truly a shortage or a curtailment of water in the river. And we believe that our communities in the western part of the state will suffer if we allow that to occur, if we don't do everything we can to avoid that. At the same time, what we have to do is make sure we provide, as is our statutory charge, the ability to continue to develop and use water to allow for the economic and cultural development and success of our constituents. And so we take that, that balance is how do we create solutions for problems that we see coming our way 10 or 20 years out and help our communities adjust to that and really create their own futures through modified water use. Bill was talking about the PVID fallowing. It's a very unique and different situation, as Bill recognized, than what we have in western Colorado. The question is there a way to help our ag community not only survive but frankly thrive and increase its economic output and preserve the working landscapes that the rest of us who aren't farming them consider open space? How do we help that agricultural community secure their future? And by doing so, how do we provide security for other important industries in western Colorado, which include tourism and agriculture, and tourism and recreation, and how do we make sure that those interests are preserved in the long run? And without understanding the bigger river issues, it is very likely that the policymakers, not only within our state but within the basin, would perhaps not focus as much on the well-being of our district's residents. And so it is expensive, as I mentioned, for us to be involved in these interstate and statewide issues on the Colorado River, but it is essential in our mind to the benefit of our constituents. And I do think that, just looking around the room, a number of folks representing conservancy districts and water user groups on the western slope are here, and they're all people that in the short 7 months or 8 months I've been general manager, I've been working with to try to make sure that we understand the future that they want to see, and that we are doing the planning and the implementation in ways that will secure a future that they desire. And I think that's really pretty critical for us, and I think the money that we're spending is frankly, and the energy and the staff time is well spent on that, and I think that's pretty critical. And I maybe I could just draw one small example of that, where our interstate involvement has really helped our local communities. And Dave Kanzer is here. He's one of our deputy chief engineers. He and other staff members have been very involved in the Gunnison Basin implementing salinity and selenium reduction measures. And in doing so, Dave's involvement in the basin-wide salinity and selenium forums and programs, he's been able to assist through our district, bringing literally millions of dollars into western Colorado to improve irrigation efficiencies, which we believe will, and I think the water users believe, will secure a longer future for our ag users as they go forward. And it not only helps the ag users becoming more efficient, but we've been very successful in reducing both selenium and salinity in the Gunnison River and the Uncompahgre River through these projects. And it would not have happened but for our district's involvement in the bigger basin issues and awareness of programs that frankly Dave and Sonia Chavez have been able to tie together and bring money in. And clearly I want to also call out that the CWCB has been a huge partner in those projects. And Brent, we appreciate that. It's really been a work in progress, but it is one that those are the types of things that our district does and is able to do because of our interstate focus. So.
Thanks, Andy. So finally for Amy, over the summer there was a collective wave of applause as Amy was moved into the executive director's role with the Upper Colorado River Commission. And before that, she served as an attorney for the state of New Mexico with the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission. And she also served as the principal for the state of New Mexico on Colorado River issues. So moving into the UCRC role, which is assigned a series of very important decision-making roles and fact-finding roles by the compact, could you sort of share with our attendees today the differences in looking at those issues from a more state-based role to this really unique role with the UCRC that sort of seeks to work on behalf of and reach consensus among 4 different states?
Sure. Yeah, this has been a big adjustment. You know, I'm an attorney by training, and as attorneys, we're taught and we're trained to be zealous advocates on behalf of our clients. And I came to the Colorado River 10 or so years ago as a member of the UCRC Legal Committee. So I was advocating for and representing the interests of the state of New Mexico. Subsequently, as I mentioned, I became New Mexico's commissioner, so I always had that New Mexico-centric perspective in my interactions and dealings with the commission. About a year ago, I jumped over to the UCRC as I was hired as its general counsel and deputy director. So I've actually been part of the staff of the commission for about 15 months now. And it has been a real adjustment. Going from a very state-focused role to a collective upper basin type of advocacy. What I strive to do for the commission and as commission staff is to ensure that there is some degree of equal footing as between the 4 upper division states. You know, notwithstanding the fact that they all have different, apportionments under the 48 Compact, they all have a vote. And so I think it's very important that each of the 4 upper division states are as engaged as possible and a part of the conversation as possible. And I also respect the fact that each state has its internal issues to contend with. The laws and the policies and politics are, even though there are similarities, as I mentioned before, there are also differences. And I think that I, as staff, need to be very sensitive to that and not advocate one state's position over another state. And that is something that I really strive not to do. I strive to maintain a more neutral upper basin perspective generally, but not advocate for any state individually. Kind of wanted to go back, Brent, if you don't mind, and touch on your opening question in terms of why are these entities that we've discussed and described today, why are they at the table? Why do they continue to come to the table? Why are they interested in the work we're doing? From my perspective, and really looking at the upper division states, each state is interested fundamentally in protecting its respective entitlement to the river. And while the 48 Compact is structured such that each state commissioner represent the interests of his and her constituencies, his and her water users and water interests in the state, those same folks have a vested interest, I would argue, and a presence in the work of the UCRC. And I'd like to use this bar chart that people have been so polite about. This has been looming over this discussion today. And in fact, I think I owe Andy and Ted a beer because their opening comments were, this was the backdrop, this very grim bar chart here. But I also think it's emblematic of why stakeholders and individuals are increasingly engaged in these issues. This is a bar chart that was taken from the recent August 24-month study, which is, a lot of us just refer to it as the August 24-month study without definition, but for those of you who are less familiar with it, what the 24-month study does is it provides current and projected hydrology in the basin, and the upper and lower basins, as well as projected operations of Lakes Powell and Mead for 24 months hence. And the 24-month study is updated on a monthly basis. So this August study is the latest. And what this particular chart looks at are inflows into Lake Powell beginning in 1964, just after the dam was constructed. And if you kind of hone in on the dark horizontal line, you'll see that the average inflows since 1964 have hovered somewhere on the order of 10.83 million acre feet. However, since 2000, which many of us mark as the beginning of this 18 or 19 year, depending on how you count, drought on the river, at least 14 years were below average. And of those, 7 well below average. And again, this is just since 2000. The August 24-month study is projecting another below normal inflow into Powell of 8.1 million acre feet for 2019. You know, I think Brent mentioned earlier, this was headline news. This was on the cover of the Denver Post, I believe, last Thursday. It made the Wall Street Journal. I wonder if 25 or 30 years ago that would have been the case. I certainly think that there is a keen interest, especially among the 7 basin states, in this issue, and certainly I think folks are paying more attention to it. The other thing I'd like to mention, which I think is kind of forms the subtext of this bar chart and so much of what we do, is that hydrology is changing more rapidly than we once thought. And I think that is primarily due to climate change. I think there, again, is a heightened level of attention when it comes to these issues and management of water as a result. And I think water users realize that there are real implications for them when it comes to these dire predictions.
Thank you, Amy. So we're going to give the audience another shot. If there are any questions that were provoked by the last couple of comments, or you had one you were just saving from Bill's first comments, this is a good opportunity to raise your hand. Or just sit there staring at us. That's cool too. Yep. Don. Yes.
I'll go to Bill, and you mentioned 2 sets of numbers that strike my curiosity. The 12% and 88% numbers of NWA's share at the beginning, and the 75 and 25% at some other place. And I'm somewhat familiar, and you went through a sketch of where you've been in that some other, in these recent 20 years. So where does those last 2 numbers fit in where we are today, where you might be in the future, kind of where we've been with some detail? Is that question clear? Yeah, I think so. We had thought that things would happen gradually on the Colorado River. And so we had a soft landing envision where California would slowly take less and less water and slowly ramp up its transfers so that it would be seamless and smooth and a piece of cake. But unfortunately, hydrology didn't work out that way, and we had a crash landing in 2003 when we lost all of our surplus water without any transfers in place. And so initially, that first year, we went from 2002 a supply of 1.25 to the next year, our approved water order was 513,000 acre feet, 550 minus a few losses that were taken. So we quickly tried to ramp up we were less than 12% in 2003. We had our plans in place, but we knew it would take time. So we needed a lot of bridge supply. So we did a lot of things in the interim. We did a deal with Nevada to take some of their water. We funded Drop 2 Reservoir, a regulating reservoir that captured water from going to Mexico. We even stored water in Arizona and got some of that back to help us. Those transfers now are finally ramping up, and by 2020, we'll be at that 25%. So we're about 22, 23% now. By 2025, we'll be at that full 25%. But once we get there, we may have to start giving up some water in a drought contingency plan. So it's never like we're done. It's always looking forward and what risks are to our supplies going forward.
What I really wanted was the looking forward component and your expectation in terms of that 25% and what might happen to that if you get there by the 2020 and where you go from there. What's your future prognosis on that number?
Yeah, so it kind of gets into the next question, but I'll briefly answer that. I think there's 3 risks to our water supply that we watch very closely. One is that there is the ability for increased demand along the Colorado River. So we're on the hook for all ag use on the Colorado River, that they have a lot more rights to use than they're currently using, mostly because it doesn't make economic sense to farm all that land. But some speculators are buying land and saying, well, we're going to lose money to irrigate so that you'll buy the water from us at a future year. So that's a risk out there that we always have to watch out for. The potential is 100,000 acre feet of increased demands that we could lose if all of the land went into production. The second thing is I briefly mentioned the Salton Sea. We don't know really. The state is working on a long-term plan for the Salton Sea. It's going to start shrinking. We don't know if it creates dust. Will there be some lawsuits that stop some of the transfers that we're counting on? That's a big question. And the third is the imbalance in the system. California has the highest right. In theory, CAP goes to 0 before we give up a drop, but we know that's not realistic. And we have to participate. And we're in this drought plan. We're going to likely give up some water, not just now, but in the long run. So those are the risks that we're having to manage and try to minimize going forward.
Maybe while people are getting their arms sort of warmed up, Amy's slide sort of triggered something in me, and it's a question really to each of you, which is, one of the things that we do is encourage NGOs or different partners that we work with to work together so that there's a little bit of efficiency. And one way that takes shape is through the Colorado River Research Group, where a number of academics that are working in different sort of areas of the Colorado River Basin get together and talk about various aspects. And they've recently talked about this slide and the fact that, we keep referring to it as, after 15 years, we said, this is the worst 15-year drought ever. And after 16 years, we said, this is the worst 16-year drought ever. And then after 17 and 18, and at one point, and they've, coined this phrase, aridification, and you can call it that, you can call it climate change, you can call it climate variability, but something seems different, at least to the NGO community, and I think we're ready to call it out as something other than just a drought, because a drought implies that there's good times right around the corner, and that may not necessarily be the case. And I think at the very least, as water managers or water leaders, we need to be thinking about what if there aren't good times right around the corner, and how do we plan for those times. But I sure haven't entered into conversations with each of you about sort of how you look at that as well, and is it ready to drop sort of this drought nomenclature around what we've experienced the last 18 years?
Well, Ted, I'll take a stab from my perspective. It's kind of a funny question. When I applied for the job at the River District last summer, I was asked to submit a writing sample. And in that writing sample, I wrote about the fact that these drought contingency plans were misnamed. That, in fact, this is a reality that we are facing. And that we have less water in our river system, we have less water for our communities, and it is by all indications, we have, while we like to be optimists, certainly our ag users are perpetual optimists, otherwise they wouldn't be in the ag business. The reality is, we believe at the River District very strongly, and I can only say this because the board, after reading my essay, then decided to hire me. So I think they agree with me on this, that is the new reality that we're facing. And yeah, there's part of me that hopes I'm wrong, but we would be very mistaken to plan for that hope. So we have to plan at the River District. We are planning for a future with less water and it being a permanent situation. The problem is the CP doesn't sound anywhere near as interesting as DCP, so we have to come up with a different acronym for it. But that's kind of my take on it.
And I can't resist either, since I hope you're not going to continue to call this Amy's slide. I'm not sure I like that. So when I started practicing water law 20 years ago, which is, not that long a time compared to some of you who have many more years of experience, but I think there was a real disinclination to talk about climate change. We talked about climate variability and aridity and so forth. Currently, I think that's really anachronistic. I mean, I feel that water managers are not only talking about climate change, they're talking about it frequently. In fact, I have a colleague in the lower basin who is not Bill and who will remain unnamed, who made a comment at a public forum, something to the extent that if a water manager cannot acknowledge climate change, that water manager does not need to be part of the discussion. And I thought that was a pretty interesting observation and something that I'm not sure that I would have heard 15 or 20 years ago. And Brad Udall is over there lurking on the side of the room, and I can't help myself because I think that both Brad and Jonathan Overpeck's work from a couple of years ago was especially stark and a particular wake-up call for those of us who are in water management. And that is, if we just observe the status quo, by the turn of the century, we could see a decrease in flows of up to 35%, I believe. I mean, that is so stark. So again, this is not a fluke, as Ted pointed out. This is not just the worst, the worst last 15 years or so forth. This is, I think, the new reality that we're having to contend with. And I'm encouraged to hear the discussion openly in all sorts of water management forum.
And I have to admit that when I give presentations in California, I borrow or steal John Overpeck, Dr. Overpeck and Brad Udall's slide that shows precipitation staying the same, temperatures, runoff going down and temperatures going up. So I think that message he's been saying that message a long time. It's resonating. And in California, it's certainly resonating this year. July was the warmest month ever in the history of California. Death Valley hit the record for the hottest month ever on the planet. I think the average temperature was 108 degrees day and night. New all-time record for the planet. In December of last year, California had the largest wildfire ever in a time when normally you don't have wildfires and fires in winter. Biggest wildfire ever, and last month we broke that record and had a new biggest wildfire that happened. The ocean temperatures in California, San Diego hit 80 degrees, Manhattan Beach 78 degrees, warmest temperature by far in the ocean, which is making, there's stories that now a hurricane could possibly hit Los Angeles because the waters are warm enough for it to stay intact. So crazy things happen. I think people finally get it, that we're not expecting a cool year next year. We're not, no one's saying that. This is not random. I think people get it, and I agree. It's not a drought contingency plan. It's a survival plan dealing with the current conditions.
Thank you guys for the perfect setup into this next question. So the Colorado River Basin states received this very clear call to action by the Bureau of Reclamation's Commissioner, Brenda Berman, last May. I'm going to read this whole statement because I think it's really pertinent for our panel. We all, states, tribes, water districts, NGOs, have an obligation and responsibility to work together to meet the needs of over 40 million people who depend on reliable water and power from the Colorado River. I'm calling on the Colorado River Basin states to put real and effective drought contingency plans in place before the end of this year. So in the months since this call to action, have stakeholders up and down the river responded to this call to action? Are you seeing more of a willingness on the folks you work with to engage on these issues? And this question is for anybody who wants to answer it.
Yeah, so we've been working on drought contingency plan for many years. And it's not an easy sell in California. We are the highest priority, right? And under this drought plan, if it's approved, if Lake Mead hits 1045, California will contribute shortage like contributions to Lake Mead. In theory, the water can get back if Lake Mead ever recovers, but no one's really counting on that. We're viewing these as shortages. And under the worst case scenario, under the really dry scenario, California would have to come up with 1.7 million acre feet of shortage contributions between now and 2026. That's not an easy thing for California to accept when we've already reduced our use and already living with less water. But nonetheless, we don't stand on our priority. We know that we need to work together and be part of the solution. But having said that, I think the drought plan itself, at least in the lower basin, I think the upper basin there might be more tools, but in the lower basin, all it really is defining cuts for each state, which gets us by the short term, but it really doesn't solve the long-term solutions. What we need are ideas and actions to reduce water use in a way that maintains our standard of life, maintains our agricultural economy, and protects the environment. One of the things, for example, that we are exploring is with Bard Water District. It's an irrigation district across from Yuma. And the farmers down in Bard, they tend to grow vegetable crops in the fall and winter, and they make a lot of money on vegetables. And in the summer, it's so hot they can't grow vegetables. They'll throw on a high water use crop that doesn't really generate much money. And they pay $900 an acre rent down there, and about $800 is allocated to the vegetables. So what we said is, well, how about we pay you to skip that summer crop that really you're not making much money, focus on what you're doing best, growing vegetables. And being a vegetarian, I really like when they grow vegetables. Focus on growing vegetables, and then that marginal crop where you're not making much money, go to the beach in San Diego and let that land rest. And that's where the water savings is. They don't use a lot of water growing vegetables, but they use a lot of water growing that marginal crop. So we just finished a 2-year program. Things like that are needed to have good ideas, and that idea came from the farming community to say, okay, how can we sustain these cuts that we know are coming, come up with good ideas on how to stretch our water supplies.
I guess we'll just go down the line here, and I think in response to the question, I would say that I certainly think there's more of a willingness for folks in the Upper Basin to engage on these issues. I think that DCP is certainly something that has gotten a lot of attention, and I would agree somewhat with Bill's comment about while we may have more tools in the Upper Basin, I would also posit that it's arguably more complicated in the Upper Basin to implement a drought contingency plan. The Upper Basin is no stranger to shortage. We routinely have shortages in the Upper Basin because we lack storage and other tools at our disposal. But I would say that the two major components of the Upper Basin drought contingency planning, and that is demand management storage and drought operations at the Colorado River Storage Project Act initial units, I think are really gaining support and momentum. They are complicated concepts, and so being able to relay to various stakeholders the intricacies of some of these components is easier said than done legally and technically. But I do think that they are tools that will get us headed in the right direction. I also want to mention that I don't personally believe that DCP is a panacea. I think it is a temporary fix. Again, looking at Amy's slide, there is a real issue when you look at inflows into Powell of 8.1 million acre feet for 2019 and a release out of Powell of 9 million acre feet. I say this because I think that while DCP needs to happen, it is absolutely necessary. We have our support behind it. We also need to be looking beyond DCP, and in particular, looking at the renegotiation of the 2007 guidelines. I think that is going to be a time for us to really look at more sustainable solutions. The DCP is a temporary fix, and I do think that when we're looking at things like climate change and some of these bigger hydrologic changes on the river, we've got to kind of keep our eye on the prize, and in my mind, that is the renegotiation of the guidelines.
I would say, I want to echo some of what Amy has said, that yes, in large part, people are, in my opinion, very willing to engage in discussing these, and those people really are water managers. But I want to say very clearly that while DCP may get us somewhere down the road, that the renegotiation of the interim guidelines that caused the operation of Powell and Meade to work is really much more critical in the long run, given what we today know about the hydrology rather than what we thought we knew in the years leading up to the 2007 interim guidelines. I think that one of the things that we're facing, however, in Colorado and certainly within our district but within the entire state, is a very significant political and cultural shift. And that we have and are today a use it or lose it state, right? You talk to anybody on the ground who irrigates their crops and have been doing that for generations in their families, they're going to talk about what their families have passed down to them in terms of the value of their water and the importance of using it to its fullest extent. And they're not wrong, but what we're talking about when we talk about demand management coming into the scene in Colorado is we're talking about a huge cultural shift in perspective, in that we are potentially asking people, if demand management becomes a real thing in Colorado, we are asking people to reduce their use voluntarily for compensation. That reduction in use, voluntary and compensated, is a hard thing to get your arms around if for generations and in your community you've been told that you and understand that water use is critical and you continue to apply as much as you can. And so it is a shift that I think water managers are talking about, but when you look at the actual water users, there's a lot of work and a lot of discussion to go on to figure out ways that shift, if it's going to happen, can happen, and that those people are secure in their futures, that the water users themselves, the ones who are growing crops or providing water to municipalities, feel and know that they are secure in their future. Because without that security and without providing a backstop, and I want to say, I mean, Don Schwent's question of Bill is one that we look at from the West Slopes perspective. So I think I know where Don might have been coming from with that question is, well, if we reduce our demands on the West Slope and our agricultural communities right now as part of a DCP, is it just another bite at that apple? Are we 10 years from now going to have a bigger bite? Are we looking at really the solution in the long run in the river being the elimination of ag water use? And that's something that from our perspective at the River District, and I don't want to speak for Southwest, but I will, Bruce. I've talked to Bruce a lot. Yeah. From our perspective, collective perspective on the Western Slope, that's not an answer. That's not an answer that will provide a viable future for our communities. And so how do you make sure that if you're talking about this shift in cultural perspective, that you're actually providing security for those families and those important community members going forward? So that's...
Yeah, I think in answer to the question, is there new energy? I think there absolutely is. All eyes are on Arizona primarily, that has to pass it through their General Assembly or their legislature, and they are meeting. They're not fighting, the two main agencies, and they're meeting with a whole host of other interested parties. So that's a good thing. And I think there's sort of renewed vigor towards that. I think, we were a little bit disappointed with the Upper Colorado River Commission's decision to forego the system conservation program that we thought was remarkably successful over the last few years. And there is sort of building momentum from farmers and ranchers that really like this program and said, we need to develop it so that we have a little bit more foresight as to whether it's going to be available. And we want this to be a little bit more robust and more long-staying than just a pilot program. And I think we saw the value of that program, especially in terms of it being a voluntary compensated program as opposed to a regulatory program, or one that is sort of imposed upon them through compact curtailment or the like. I think we're going to need to continue to be more creative and think outside the box. I do think that, the example that Bill gave with farmers and ranchers sort of shifting the way they grow, we like to see agricultural communities continue to be robust and have healthy agricultural economies. And I think a little bit about the Verde River Valley, where through TNC and a partnership there, they were growing alfalfa, and which was really intensive and needed a lot of water in June, July, August, and into September. They've switched in certain areas to barley, which needs its water more in February, March, April, May, and then it can leave that water in the stream for the benefit of the river. And they're growing barley, and they sell that off to local breweries, and they're, so if you want to save water, drink more beer is the moral of that story. But, I think we need to think more creatively. And then, I think of another program or project that we've got going on right now that we're working with our friends at the Bechtel Foundation, Google, NASA, looking at satellite imagery and thermal infrared technology to determine what is the appropriate consumptive use of different crops. I mean, we are talking with farmers and ranchers who will say, well, yeah, the way we used to operate, we'd look over and we'd see that Farmer Joe had turned on his sprinklers, and so we would turn on ours because he must know something that we don't know. And that's not the right way necessarily to operate. We can look at sort of real consumptive uses, through technology and technological improvements to save water, save money, and actually develop solutions that are going to work better for farmers and ranchers and for the entire community. So, thanks.
So we've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to ask one more question. Oh, go ahead, Amy.
Can I have a little rebuttal time?
Please do.
Thank you. So I wanted to comment on Ted's comment with respect to the System Conservation Pilot Program. And again, for those of you who do not know, that was a program in the Upper Basin. There's also a System Conservation Program in the Lower Basin, but the Upper Basin's program has been administered by the UCRC since 2015. And as a pilot, and I agree with Ted. I think it was a very successful pilot in terms of demonstrating a proof of concept that voluntary compensated demand management in the Upper Basin can work. And I think we saw that. I think we saw some great partnerships with the NGO community. I mean, I don't truly think we could have seen the successes we did but for partners like TU and TNC, and certainly Walton is a big funding partner through Denver Water. I think that was really terrific. It is also true, as Ted mentioned, that the UCRC adopted a resolution in June of this year that suspended the SCPP, but suspended the SCPP in the interest of standing up, developing in the future a larger demand management program that may very well be modeled after the SCPP. In total, we estimate that we will have conserved, or we calculate that we have seen conserved consumptive uses in the SCPP of somewhere just shy of 50,000 acre feet. Now that's in 4 years of the program. That is a drop in the bucket compared to what we think we need to actually make a difference at Powell with respect to Powell elevations, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of between 200 and 500,000 acre feet. So again, I don't think that this should be taken, and I can't speak for the commission certainly on this, but I don't think this should be taken as a lack of willingness to support a demand management program. Certainly demand management storage is one of the very, I think, key aspects of our drought contingency planning in the Upper Basin. And I think the commission has every intention to pursue that, albeit on a larger scale.
Thanks, Amy. So we've got about 7 minutes left, 7 to 10 minutes. If there are any other questions from the audience for any of our panelists, this is the time. I saw Mr. Merritt's hand up first.
Oh, yeah. Well, this will be for the representative of the lower basin.
No pressure.
For all the uses down there. We have a great bit of angst over the fact that Lake Mead has fallen so low over the past decade. But this is in light of excess releases from Lake Powell over the past decade. We've averaged 9 million acre feet of deliveries each year in the last decade, in spite of lower flows. And then to see Lake Mead fall drastically like that, we can't keep that up, and even getting back to 7.5 to the lower basin is not going to really fix that. How do you, as lower basin, plan to get that back?
So I can put my lower basin hat on, and so we understand that the system is out of whack. We also understand that in 2007, the guidelines were written to help both the lower basin and upper basin through balancing releases. And if Lake Powell got too low like it did in 2012, releases were ramped down and it only released 7.48 million acre feet. Lake Mead happened to be a little higher, so that was the rules. And then since that time, Lake Powell's been a little bit higher and Lake Mead's lower, so it shifted up to 9. So it goes back and forth, and both basins benefit. And in the near future, we could go back to another 7.48 release in the upper basin if we have a dry year. So I wouldn't highlight the 9 million I mean, that was part of the rules to help both basins get through dry times. In addition to the 9 million acre feet, the lower basin has reduced its use dramatically. Last year, we only took delivery of about 7.8 million acre feet of water out of the 7.5, leaving 700,000 in Lake Mead, both as ICS storage and unused water through system conservation or just regular unused water. So we really dropped our demands at the same time the upper basin was helping us with these extra flows. And Lake Mead has actually been steady for the last 4 years. That's probably going to change. Or could change if we get another dry year up here. But we're working on doing that, and that's what this drought contingency plan is designed to do, is permanently reduce, or at least through 2026 until things become permanent, reduce the lower basin's demand to try to help address the exact same problem you're talking about.
Got another question at this table right here.
I have a question for Bill as well. As Ted said, all eyes are on Arizona right now with respect to finalization of the DCP. But can you tell us the status of internal California agreements and final adoption of the DCP? Are there any remaining barriers or issues that need to be cleared up within California?
Right, so California, it's not a deal until the boards have approved everything, but the general managers have reached a conceptual agreement about how it would work. And it's similar to when California reduced its use down to 4.4, now we would reduce our use further. It's the same type of arrangement where Metropolitan generally provides incentive for the agricultural uses to reduce their use, and they agree that when there's a level, they will participate. So we don't follow the pure priority system in California. PVID, Coachella, IID would all share in the reductions, but they would get some incentives to help do that. So we have a conceptual agreement. We still have to go through the environmental compliance process on the Salton Sea, which, that's a little bit of a wild card. And we still have to get approval of each of our boards, with the IID board is always a little bit of a wild card as well. But we're confident that at least the general managers have a framework that we could reach agreement by the end of this year if Arizona steps up.
We're going to do one more question, and we'll call it a day.
Now, the question I have is, as of today, Lake Powell is 33 feet down below last year. Lake Mead is 2 feet below last year. The question I have with Amy, your chart, if you had taken the minimum probability or the minimum expectation, you know, my concern is, are we looking at another 50 feet in Lake Powell and Lake Mead staying the same? What's the projections that we're looking at on those two lakes?
Well, I am probably the least qualified from a technical standpoint to respond to this, but I'll touch on a couple things. I mean, first of all, what made the headlines last week is that the states of Arizona and Nevada, for the first time, may see a shortage as early as 2020, to your point about Mead elevations, right? Dropping below that first trigger elevation of 1075. Likewise, the upper basin may see another one of these very low releases that Bill mentioned. In 2012, we saw the first under the guidelines of 7.48 million acre feet. I think both of those benchmarks are emblematic that the hydrology is changing quicker than we thought it would. The 2007 guidelines are not getting us where we need to be. We've got drought contingency plans now that are being negotiated quickly so that we can plug this gap between now and the renegotiation of the guidelines that will begin in 2020. But it is alarming and it's real, and these declines we see are precipitous. I think Lake Powell right now, in terms of the volume, sits at about 49%. So it's a real concern, and it's going to become, even more so if we see this precipitous, decline in terms of hydrology and reservoir elevations.
Well, I would just add to that this is a recovering lawyer speaking, so similar to Amy. If you picture a bucket like a reservoir, if we had a 33-foot drop this year and the bucket is getting smaller as we go down, if we were to have a repeat of this year's hydrology, we will be extremely close to some critical levels, what we would identify 35-25 as a really important level to assure the ability to produce power and release enough water to meet compact obligations. And so, our internal modeling shows that we're looking at getting very close to that if the hydrology repeats itself next year. That's the best you can say, but it's a grim reality that the entire upper basin is facing on that.
Sure, I'll add another lawyer's perspective to this hydrologic question, but I think, importantly, the way the guidelines work, I mean, the whole concept was that the reservoirs would fall and raise a little bit more equivalently than they had under, the operations before the 07 guidelines. And importantly, Bill acknowledged, how we did see a release of 7.48 in one of the years since the adoption of the 07 guidelines. The 07 guidelines also contemplate a release as low as 7.0 acre feet as well under certain circumstances. So certainly, I would expect that if we see another dry year, you will see Lake Mead hover or drop below, drop more than it has this past year, even though we saw 4 million acre feet less in the system. And I think you'll see even greater declines at Powell just because of the hydrology and the way the system operates. But it projects or contemplates this concept of shortages being taken in 2020, and which is sort of the headline of the report that came out a week or so ago.
Well, I'm really glad that we were able to conclude on such a cheery note for the room. So thank you all for attending today's workshop, and please join me in thanking these panelists for their work today.